Sherman's headquarters would have done justice to a bandit chief. It traveled in a single wagon, including baggage for all clerks, aides, and orderlies. "I think it's as low down as we can get," he said. He scorned elaborate equipment hauled along by comfort-seeking officers as a farce. Nothing but poverty will cure it. There had been only 3 aides, though 2 others had come recently, one of them Major Henry Hitchcock, a young Republican lawyer from St. Louis, who was assigned to handle a correspondence that had begun to overwhelm the general. "Just tell him something sweet, Hitchcock. You know, honey and molasses." Hitchcock had been completely won over by Sherman at their first meeting. Despite the general's eccentricities, the young lawyer found him straightforward, simple, kind-hearted, nay, warm-hearted, scrupulously just, and careful of the rights of others. Above all, Hitchcock was impressed with Sherman's competence. "You may be sure of one thing. What he says he can do, he can." Tonight the general's meal was as simple as those of his interminable marches: hardtack, sweet potatoes, bacon, and coffee. Sherman gnawed at a flinty piece of hardtack and began his familiar lecture on its virtues, halted to greet a dispatch-bearer, ripped open a message, and barked out a reply. He talked of the enemy, of Southern women, of U.S. Grant and President Lincoln, heedlessly gulping his food, then returning to the smoldering cigar, still talking and laughing, giving orders, dictating telegrams. "Bright and chipper," one of his generals noted. He cut short others who spoke and went on with his hurried comments, refusing to be interrupted. "I'm too red-haired to be patient," he had said. A war correspondent described him as he was at this moment. He walked, talked, or laughed all over. He perspired thought at every pore, pleasant and affable, engaging, with a mood that shifted like a barometer in a tropic sea. The meal was ended by a regimental band from Massachusetts, blaring beneath the windows in a serenade to the general, the brasses pealing incongruously above the explosions and roaring flames. Sherman listened briefly, lost interest, and turned back to dispatch-bearers and officers who had come for orders. After a few lively military tunes, the band played the Miserere from Il Trovatore, whose melancholy beauty, Henry Hitchcock thought, would forever remind him of this November night of roaring flames when Atlanta was destroyed and the army began its march to the sea. Drunken Federal soldiers had been setting fires in the stricken city for several days in defiance of Sherman's orders, but the official work of destruction had begun only when 2 Michigan regiments knocked down the massive stone roundhouse with improvised battering rams, placed powder charges under large buildings, and piled mountains of worn-out wagons, tents, and bedding in the railroad depot, ready for the torch. Sherman had ordered the city's destruction postponed until this night of November 15th. A foundry, an oil refinery, and a freight warehouse were burned first. The blazing depot square spread a storm of fire. The Atlanta Hotel, Washington Hall, dry goods stores, theaters, the fire stations and jail, slave markets, went up in flames. A mine exploded in a stone warehouse. Old pine timbers burned with astonishing brilliance and flung brands in all directions. The sun shone blood-red through a thickening cloud. The air for miles about was oppressive and intolerable. By night, the burning city was the grandest and most awful scene, with fires towering hundreds of feet into the sky. Hitchcock watched in fascination. First bursts of smoke, dense black volumes, then tongues of flame, then huge waves of fire roll up into the sky. Presently the skeletons of great warehouses stand out in relief against sheets of roaring, blazing, furious flames. As one fire sinks, another rises, lurid, angry, dreadful to look upon. The fires died down before midnight, and the glare began to fade. Hitchcock saw that the courthouse and Masonic Hall still stood. No private homes within view of headquarters had been burned, but tomorrow, he thought, when the guards are gone, all would go up in smoke. Already bands of drunken Federal soldiers raced through the streets on foot and horseback, smashing plate glass windows, bearing huge loads of uniforms from army warehouses, and selling them on street corners for any price they could get. Sherman's troops gathered before large buildings and shouted and danced and sang, while pillar and roof and dome sank into one common ruin. A bitter stench filled the night, odors of pine, tar, gunpowder, oil, charred meat and cloth,